China's biggest weakness is not Taiwan, not democracy, not ideology, and not even its aging population, but a structural vulnerability buried deep inside the foundations of its economic rise. A weakness so fundamental that no amount of military power can fully solve it, and that weakness is dependence. For decades, China's strategy has been built on the assumption that global trade would remain open, predictable, and largely protected from geopolitical disruption, an assumption that allowed Beijing to import massive quantities of energy, food, and raw materials, while exporting finished goods to every corner of the world. This model worked because the global system was stable, and because the United States, intentionally or not, guaranteed the security of the sea lanes that made Chinese growth possible. Nearly 70% of China's oil is imported, most of it traveling thousands of miles by ship through narrow maritime chokepoints that Beijing does not control. The same is true for natural gas, key industrial minerals, and even food staples, making China's economy less self-sufficient than its scale suggests. Taiwan dominates headlines because it is dramatic and visible, but Taiwan is not where China is weakest. It is where China is strongest militarily. The real vulnerability lies far from the battlefield, at sea, where China's factories, power plants, and cities depend on uninterrupted flows of energy and commodities. The Malacca Strait alone carries roughly 80% of China's oil imports, a narrow corridor that could be monitored, restricted, or disrupted during a major crisis. Other routes through the South China Sea, the Lombok Strait, and the Hormuz corridor are similarly exposed, creating a logistical nightmare if access is threatened. China understands this, which is why it has spent years trying to diversify routes through pipelines from Russia and Central Asia, port investments across the Indian Ocean, and infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. But these efforts reduce risk only marginally. Pipelines lack the capacity to replace maritime imports at scale. Alternative routes are longer and more expensive, and overseas ports do not equal control if the surrounding waters remain contested. Military expansion does not fully solve the problem either. China's navy has grown rapidly, but projecting sustained power far from home waters is difficult, expensive, and vulnerable to countermeasures. Escorting every tanker is impossible, and defending thousands of miles of supply lines during conflict would stretch even the most advanced fleet. This is the silent pressure point in China's rise, the reason Beijing is cautious about escalation even when rhetoric sounds aggressive. Economic growth, social stability, and political legitimacy inside China are tied directly to energy availability and price stability. A prolonged disruption would ripple through manufacturing, employment, and domestic confidence far faster than a limited military setback. This is why China invests heavily in strategic reserves, why it avoids direct confrontation with major naval powers, and why it frames many disputes as regional rather than global. The obsession with Taiwan often distracts from this deeper reality, that China's strength is built on access it does not fully control, and in geopolitics, access equals vulnerability. The implications of this vulnerability reshape how global power competition actually works, because they explain why pressure applied far from Taiwan can be more decisive than conflict near it. Energy chokepoints function as economic pressure valves, allowing external powers to influence China's behavior without direct confrontation. Control over shipping insurance, port, access, refueling hubs, and maritime surveillance can slow trade flows incrementally, raising costs and uncertainty without firing a shot. These tools are subtle but powerful, and they operate continuously rather than episodically. The United States and its partners possess structural advantages in this domain, not because of ideology, but because of geography, alliances, and naval reach. Most of the world's critical maritime corridors are either directly patrolled by U.S. forces, or lie within regions where U.S. partners have influence. This creates a network effect that amplifies pressure over time. China's response has been to pursue redundancy, stockpiling resources, investing in domestic alternatives, and accelerating technological substitution, but redundancy is expensive and rarely complete. Every additional layer of security increases costs, erodes efficiency, and slows growth. This is the trade-off Beijing faces: resilience versus expansion. As the global environment becomes more contested, the cost of maintaining access rises, forcing China to spend more simply to preserve existing activity. This is why long-term competition increasingly revolves around infrastructure, standards, and logistics rather than ideology or territorial disputes. Whoever shapes the rules of trade, finance, and transit gains leverage that outlasts any single crisis. Taiwan remains important symbolically and strategically, but it is not the axis on which China's future turns. The real contest is whether China can reduce its dependence faster than external pressures increase. If it succeeds, it gains autonomy and bargaining power. If it fails, it remains constrained by a system it does not control. This dynamic also explains China's caution. its preference for gradual influence rather than sudden confrontation, and its emphasis on economic integration, even with strategic rivals. Escalation risks exposing vulnerabilities that are difficult to hide and impossible to fix quickly. For outside observers, focusing solely on military flashpoints misses the deeper structure of power. Wars are decided long before battles begin, in supply chains, logistics, and access. China's biggest weakness is not a single island or a political system, but the simple reality that modern economies require constant flow, and flow can be influenced. Until China controls its inputs as securely as it controls its territory, it will remain powerful but constrained, ambitious but cautious, strong yet strategically exposed. This is the paradox at the heart of China's rise, and it is where the real contest over global power is being decided.